Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you very much for coming today. It's an honor to meet you. I'm Sho Sakurai. Nice to meet you.
Very nice to meet you, Ken Isaji.
事務総長についてもお話をお伺いしていきたいと思います。今年2026年年末に任期が終了されるということで、この10年間についてお伺いしていきたいと思います。2017年に就任してから、コロナパンデミックもありましたし、各地での紛争もありました。事務総長として大変なご苦労があった、いわば激動の10年だったかと思うんですけれども、振り返ってみて、国連トップとして振り返ってみて、この激動の10年、どのように捉えていらっしゃいますか？
I think these 10 years were 10 years that considerably worsened the situation in the world. First of all, we have peace in a very difficult situation. We have conflicts multiplying, and some of the conflicts are having at their head the superpowers, permanent members of the Security Council, sometimes members of the Security Council violating international law. Look at the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, looking at some of the bombardments by the United States. And at the same time, the same superpowers have a right of veto in the Security Council. The Security Council that is far from representing today's reality, because we have 3 European permanent members, just 1 Asian and 1 North American, and Asia is underrepresented. There is no Africa, no Latin America. So indeed, we need a reform of the Security Council to be able to address the challenges that the peace situation today faces. But then we had the impact of the pandemic that dramatically increased the difficulties of developing countries. We have an enormous increase of inequality in the world during this period. Big fortunes growing enormously, and some people in very dramatic situations, and many countries of the developing world drowning in debt, unable to provide to their citizens the minimum basic services. Then we had climate change that has accelerated, and unfortunately we should now witness the reduction of emissions at a very, very quick path, and we are not yet there. And scientists already say that inevitably, in 2 or 3 years, we will have an overshoot. Temperatures will be above 1.5. Then there will be time and capacity, hopefully, if we act drastically, to make it as short as possible and as small as possible. But that, again, will have dramatic consequences in small island developing states, in areas of Africa that are prone to drought, in so many heat waves that have caused so many troubles, even in developed countries. So, I mean, climate change remains out of control. And now we have a huge development of technologies, namely digital technologies, artificial intelligence, and we are far from having the regulatory mechanisms that guarantee that they will be entirely at the service of humankind. Of course, they have enormous potential to solve the problems of the world, to improve the response to the Sustainable Development Goals, to improve health, to improve education, to improve industry. But at the same time, they represent a clear threat that needs to be addressed properly, and we are not yet equipped. So in a world with conflicts multiplying, in a world with inequalities growing, in a world with climate change in chaos, and in a world in which we are not yet able to dominate the technologies that are being developed, we are in deep trouble. And that is why it's more important than ever to have multilateral institutions, but with the force, the strength, allowing them to act in order to reverse these trends. and in order to make sure that the next decade will be a decade of recovery and not a decade of worsening an already very bad situation.
近年、ロシアによるウクライナの侵攻、そしてパレスチナ自治区ガザ地区での戦闘、そしてアメリカ、イスラエルによるイランの攻撃など戦闘が絶えない現状が続いています。国連の平和を維持する力の低下が指摘されることもあるかと思うんですけれども、その点どのように考えていらっしゃいますか。
Well, obviously, when we have the superpowers themselves involved in these conflicts, it is very difficult for United Nations, in which the Security Council is deeply divided, representing the divisions, the geopolitical divisions in the world, when those that are the perpetrators of the violations of international law are those that then have the responsibility to judge that situation and to address it and solve it, it is extremely difficult to respond effectively. We must affirm the principle that international law must be respected by all, especially by the powerful. And we need to be all united to make sure that this happens. And I pay tribute to Japan. Japan has been consistently in support of international law. Japan has been consistently in support of multilateralism and recognizes that it's impossible to solve the problems of the world by one country or by two countries, especially when those countries are fighting each other, or at least have divergent interests that reflect then in the global economy, that reflect them in global peace and security. So, contrary to the idea that now multilateralism is in crisis, what is in crisis is the geopolitical divisions. What is in crisis is the behavior of superpowers that undermine completely the efforts that organizations like the United Nations can have in order to bring back the peace and security we all want. And by the way, Japan has been consistently advocating for the reform of the Security Council. And we believe that that reform is absolutely vital.
グテレス事務総長自身40年ほど前に広島、長崎を訪れ、その時に日本が平和のリーダーというようなことも口にされています。そのような今お話になったような環境の中で日本にどのようなことを今後求めていらっしゃいますか。
I think the Japanese leadership is vital. We are discussing the Non-Proliferation Treaty as we speak. And the role of Japan with the moral authority that Japan has no nuclear weapons. Japan was the country where the two nuclear bombs exploded, destroying two cities, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And indeed, I was the first Secretary General that participated in the ceremonies of both Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So Japan has a moral authority to ask all countries to make a success of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and at the same time to ask all countries to start again thinking seriously about disarmament. But unfortunately, what we are seeing countries with creating more nuclear heads in their arsenals, countries investing in the modernization of those arsenals, and no progress in disarmament negotiations. And the moral authority of Japan, the moral authority of the Ibakusha. I was again today with two distinguished members of that fantastic group. That moral authority needs to be amplified by the efforts of us all in order to make sure that we move deliberately to a world without nuclear weapons.
事務総長、核兵器のですね禁止条約が発効して5年が過ぎました。しかし唯一の被爆国である日本はこの禁止条約に締約していませんし、またオブザーバー参加もしていません。日本の参加を求めますでしょうか。そして日本はですねアメリカの核の傘の下にある、そのために外交安全保障上の理由からもですねこの核兵器禁止条約にはなかなか参加決断ができない、こうした現状をですね今アメリカが大きく変わる中で どのようにご覧になりますでしょうか。
Well, I understand the complexity of the position in Japan and the nature of the debate. Obviously, we would like to have Japan as a member, but what is important is that independently of that fact, Japan has been consistently a permanent voice for disarmament. And so we cannot minimize the efforts of Japan that have been consistent, permanent and very intense, with the fact that in the circumstances that you mentioned, it was difficult to find the national consensus to join the treaty.
第二次世界大戦から80年間、これまでと同じようにこれからも日本が平和な国であり続けるためにどのようなことが日本にとって必要だと事務総長考えていらっしゃいますか。
Well, it's for Japan to be itself. Japan has been a peaceful country, and Japan will remain a peaceful country. We are absolutely sure. And I have an enormous admiration for the consistent efforts of Japan in order to contribute to global peace and security. And I recognize the concerns of Japan, concerns in relation to the PRK and its nuclear armament and its missiles, concerns, and I'm deeply in solidarity with Japan about the disappeared people and the fact that there is no adequate information about that. So Japan has many concerns, but even with those concerns, Japan has maintained a consistent position in favor of peace.
実はですね、昨年中光事務次長に私お話をお伺いしました。その際にですね、事務総長の言葉を借りると、安保理は祖父母世代のために作られたシステムで孫世代の未来を築くことはできませんと事務総長が以前おっしゃっていたというふうにお伺いしました。安保理と国連の改革を口にされていましたけれども、安保理が正常に機能していないのではないかという意見もある中で、この国連の機能というのは正しく機能されているんでしょうか。
Well, let's be clear. The UN is a large family. We have indeed a Security Council in which the capacity to address the threats that exist in the world has been very limited. We see, unfortunately, the Security Council that has a question of legitimacy because its composition no longer reflects today's world, and the question of effectiveness because of the veto and different other reasons. But the UN is also the group of humanitarian agencies that are doing a fantastic job, even with now huge cuts in the resources. But they are rescuing people from hunger, rescuing people from death, supporting people in health, supporting communities that are in dramatic situations because of conflict. And the UN is also a very active voice in climate action and a leader in all the efforts in order to make sure that we address effectively the problems of climate change. The UN has been extremely committed to make sure that the artificial intelligence becomes a force for good. And it was now created within the UN an international independent scientific panel that will be reporting about what is happening in artificial intelligence to aid decision makers to take the right decisions to make it a force for good. And so in all these areas, the UN has been extremely active and in a very positive way. We have indeed the problem that the Security Council doesn't deliver as we would like. And at the same time, let's be honest, as all organizations, national governments, other entities, we can do better and we can do more. And we are making a serious effort of reform, the so-called UN 80, not of the Security Council, because of that we cannot, but of the way the UN work to make sure that there are no duplications, to make sure that there is a perfect convergence of the different agencies, the different entities. We have reduced 20% of the posts in the Secretariat in the last budget. which means a big effort to be more effective and more cost effective. We have determined, and member states have determined, to have a broad review now about how mandates are created, are implemented, and are reviewed, because we have enormous difficulties with the multiplicity of responsibilities that need to be looked at. And we have, at the present moment, in 5 countries, the key humanitarian agencies have brought together their supply chains. Can you imagine what humanitarian agencies, World Food Programme that deals with food, IOM that deals with movement of people, UNHCR that deals with refugees, UNICEF that deals with children, all these agencies, keeping their mandates separated, are putting together the supply chain, are putting together common services in order to be able to reduce the costs and to make sure that all the money we can get is not used by the bureaucracy, let us say, but it is used directly to support the people we care for. So we are not perfect from the point of view of our organization, but we are totally committed to reform and to modernize, to be more effective, more cost effective. There are things we cannot do. We cannot reform the Security Council because it strictly depends on member states, as we are not able to reform the international financial architecture that is deeply unfair and that condemns many developing countries to very dramatic situations. That we cannot do. We have not the power for that. That power is with member states, and especially with those member states that have a stronger influence in world affairs.
事務総長、そもそも国連はですね、第二次世界大戦の戦勝国の連合国であります。この第二次世界大戦後のですね、枠組み80年を経まして、その常任理事国であるアメリカ、そしてロシア、こうした国々がですね、この国連憲章を背を向ける、踏みにじるような行為に出るような時代になってきました。こうした中でですね、この現在の常任理事国5カ国のシステム、これが正常に機能していないという現状がございます。この常任理事国のシステムを変えていく、そういう考えはありますでしょうか。
Well, we have advocated strongly for the need to have more permanent representatives in the United Nations. First of all, the continents that have no representation at all, Africa and Latin America. And we consider it is absolutely crucial that those continents are represented. Then Asia is dramatically underrepresented. Asia has just one member in the Security Council. And if you look at Asia today and its role in the world economy and its role in the world science in all aspects, it is the population, of the Asian continent, it is clear that one single permanent member doesn't make any sense. So we need to enlarge the Security Council to have more permanent members and more non-permanent members to represent what today's world is and not the world that existed after the Second World War. And this is a reform. There is an intergovernmental group that is working on that. To be honest, better than some years ago where it was a taboo. Now it's on the table. Now everybody discusses it and everybody recognizes that the reform is necessary. Even those that benefit from the present situation have to recognize that the reform is necessary. But of course, here is a question of power. And as we know, it's very difficult for people to give their own power. Usually power is taken, but in circumstances like this, it has proven to be very tough.
つい最近でいうと米中の首脳会談が行われました。率直にどのような感想をお持ちになられたのかと、また今後その世界の平和と安定にどのような影響があるとお考えでしょうか。
Well, it looked like a summit aiming at an appeasement. It was a very cordial summit, but as far as we can look at the press and the statements, there was no breakthrough in any of the crucial issues that the world is facing today. So I think it was a positive situation in which the two countries, they praised themselves, each other. There was a positive atmosphere, but indeed we have not seen measures that change dramatically the present global situation.
この米中首脳会談でですね、この両首脳は新しい建設的戦略安定関係、この構築を合意しました。この新しいこの関係はですね、この国際紛争を回避する上で有効に働きますでしょうか。中国の習近平国家主席はトゥキディディスの罠を引き合いに出しまして、アメリカと中国が戦争にならないようにこの警告したとも受け止められています。事務総長、どうご覧になりますか。
I think that is an important observation. As you know, the Thucydides trap is that it was the rise of Athens and the fear that that triggered in Sparta that made, according to Thucydides, the war inevitable. There is a very interesting book that relates to different similar situations that happen in the world of powers re-emerging and others losing ground. And that book demonstrates that in some cases there were wars and in other cases there was no war. So war is not inevitable. And I hope that this was mentioned in this meeting exactly to say that the two countries do not need to enter into a situation of confrontation, because of confrontation of these two powers would be a total disaster for humankind.
SDGs に関してもお伺いしていきたいと思います。2016年に正式に始まりました SDGs の取り組みですけれども、2030年までの達成を目標しているにもかかわらず、現在3分の2程度はその達成のめどが立っておらず、中には後退しているものもあります。こうした状況、SDGs の状況、事務総長、どのようにご覧になりますか。
Well, the SDGs are an extremely important guide of what needs to be done. But the SDGs have not provided the resources to do it. And unfortunately, what we are witnessing is that instead of increasing international cooperation, instead of increasing the volume of resources to apply, especially in developing countries, for the SDGs to be a success, that support is decreasing. The financial resources available for development cooperation and humanitarian aid are in free fall. And so obviously the SDGs have suffered. It's not the SDGs are wrong, the SDGs are right, they are the right policies that we need, but what we lack are the resources necessary and sometimes also the governance that is necessary in order to make sure that they are successful. But we do not give up, and we go on insisting, and namely the reforms we are doing in the UN, the Pact for the Future last year, now the UN 80, are aiming at, in the extremely difficult situation that we have, to help as much as possible the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, especially by the poorest countries in the world.
以前ですね、国連開発計画のフランキーを取材した時にですね、このまま気温の上昇が続くと絶滅の危機だと訴えていたのが印象的でした。事務総長ご自身も地球沸騰化という表現をされるなど、気温の上昇は深刻な状況になっているかと思います。私たちメディアも国連と協力しまして 1.5 度の約束キャンペーンとして国際的な意識を高める報道を続けていますけれども、この目標の達成の難しさというのも日々痛感するところです。この目標達成のめどというのは今見えていますか。
The world was addicted to fossil fuels, and 90% of the emissions come from fossil fuels. And what we are seeing today are three very important aspects. First, the fossil fuels have a dramatic impact in climate change. Second, today renewables are much cheaper, much more effective and cost-effective than fossil fuels. And third, they are the only way to guarantee energy security. I mean, you can close the Strait of Hormuz. It doesn't impact on solar or wind energy. The sol will not disappear, and the wind will not stop to blow. And so countries that have bet on the renewables are countries that are today in a much better position when the Strait of Hormuz is closed. And so the solution is to accelerate the transition, must be a just transition from fossil fuels to renewables if we want to make that overshoot of 1.5 degrees small and short in time, and if we want to go back to a trajectory in which we have a planet that will not move into the kind of chaotic situation that we are starting to witness in some circumstances. And as I said, the central question is we need to accelerate the transition from fossil fuels to renewables.
トランプ大統領がですね、この気候変動に際して、史上最大の詐欺と非難したりとか、またこのパリ協定からの離脱もしました。本来であればこの SDGs を主導すべきですね、立場である大国のアメリカがこの正反対の動きをしている現状がございます。世界的な気候変動のこのムーブメントに対する一つの足かせにもなっているように言えるんですけども、この辺事務総長どう受け止められますでしょうか。
Well, it is for me a stimulus to do everything in order to make sure that we accelerate the transition and to do everything in order to mobilize the whole world in defense of climate action. And what is interesting is that even inside the United States, we see governors, we see municipalities, and we see the private sector acting, taking into account economic rationality. I think it was last month that for the first time renewables have increased production more than fossil fuels, which means that even in the United States, things will inevitably move in relation to what is economic rationality, economic security, and protection of the planet.
世界中で今、自国民第一主義、そして排外主義が台頭していると思います。このような状況を事務総長自身、危機感を持って見てらっしゃいますか。もし危機感を持たれているようでしたら、今後どのようなことを意識していくべきだとお考えでしょうか。
It is a very dramatic situation, and let's be honest, the action of social media, the way they are organized, the way the business model is conceived, makes very easy misinformation boost the xenophobic sentiments. It's always easy to blame someone else. So we can blame either the government or the foreigners. Or in the same country, when there are different communities and the situation is not good, you blame the other community. And we need to fight that, because we are all members of the same family, and diversity is a richness, is not a threat. So to fight against xenophobia is an absolute priority for us in the UN.
国連の機能低下が言われてはいますけれども、例えばこのロシアのウクライナ侵略に対してはですね、国連総会の決議というものが機能しました。国連のですね、この力というものはやはりこの国際世論を喚起する力があると思います。そうした意味ではこの SNS、この誤情報の氾濫に対しても国連として何か今後大きなアクションを起こしていく考えはありますでしょうか。
We have our global communications department that is very active. We had a campaign, if you remember, during the COVID called Verified, in which we were trying to make sure that the right information would be classified as such, for the wrong information to be, denied. And we have a permanent effort with our resources that are limited, but a permanent effort in order to fight misinformation, disinformation. We even approved the code of conduct for platforms in relation to that. So this is an area of great concern to us, and we are totally committed to do what we can. But unfortunately, in my country, they say that what is news is not when a dog bites a man, it's when a man bites a dog. And unfortunately, we see social media acting in line with this aphorism. And what is scandalous, what is negative, what sells probably be better, and so it is favored. And I think it's important to ask social media to have a much stronger assumption of responsibilities to avoid this to happen. And their business models need to be done in a way that does not facilitate the expansion of feelings like xenophobia and others of the same nature.
若者たちへのメッセージも頂戴したいと思います。日本では若者たちが日本を離れない、海外に出ないような傾向が強まっています。次の世代の若者に国際社会で活躍してもらうために事務総長から何か日本の若者にメッセージいただけないでしょうか。
I think young people need to learn with us. My generation has failed in many aspects. Climate change is a good example. I think the young people need to assume a more direct influence, and I'm very much in favor of reforms in the political systems in which to guarantee that young people have not only a voice, but have a real influence in the way decisions are taken. Because not only the future, even this present now belongs to young people.
日本では初めて女性の総理が誕生しました。高市総理に期待すること何かありますか？
Well, I think it's very important that you have a woman prime minister, and I think this should be a stimulus in order for Japan to accelerate its policies in relation to gender equality, and we will do everything possible to support this effort.
高市総理大臣がですね、この日本初の女性の総理大臣として、初めて選ばれました。こうしたですね、新しいリーダーのですね、この女性リーダーに求めるもの、やはりこのジェンダーの問題であるとか、そうした多様性の確保だといったものもあると思います。そうしたこと以外にですね、やはり事務総長としてこの日本の女性ならではのこのリーダーシップの発揮の仕方、ことはとりわけこの安全保障の分野等では何かお考えありますでしょうか。
Well, it's very simple. We since already 3 years ago, since 3 years ago, we have equal number of women and men in the 160, 170 positions of leadership in the UN. And we aim to reach parity at all levels and until 228. But for 3 years now, and it was maintained, we have equal numbers of women and men at the positions of responsibility in the UN. We have our resident coordinators, that are representatives around the world. Resident coordinators that some time ago were with a majority of men, now there is a majority of women. So we are really leading by example. Do like we do, and I think everything will be better if countries, governments, institutions, companies take profit of the richness that is the combination of men and women in positions of responsibility. Decisions taken only by men are not necessarily good. Decisions taken only by women are not necessarily good when we have equilibrium with the two gender in decision-making processes. I think that will contribute for the world to improve.
ありがとうございました。本日は貴重なお時間、貴重なお話の数々ありがとうございました。
ありがとうございました。
It was a pleasure. All the best also for your TV station, and all the best for all women and men and young people that will be listening to us.
ありがとうございました。
ありがとう。
Thank you so much.